So, we are talking about land lives and local action today, addressing invasive species together. And we have a wonderful panel who's going to share their experiences with us today. So, let's go ahead and check it out. So, we are your hosts today. We are Sustainability Matters. Um, we are a really tiny but mighty grassroots nonprofit that started and is based in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, but we do actually operate throughout Northern Virginia and throughout the whole Ridge and Valley region. And our primary goal really is to make sustainability fun and realistic and inclusive of everybody. That's what we pride ourselves on, and as well cultivating that connection with community, and by bringing folks just like yourselves together so we can learn tools and knowledge and share our stories like our wonderful panelists are going to do today. So we would love to know a little bit more about where everybody's starting out today. So I'm going to go ahead and end the intro poll. Thank you so very much for doing that one. Now, I want to pose one more question and just to see where everybody is at. So I'm going to go ahead and pop up this question. So let us know where you're at in your invasive species journey. Are you just starting out and wanting to learn more, or are you already super familiar and just wanting to maybe meet some more people working in this space and trying to learn about some more stories and resources? So we'll give people about 20 seconds to answer this. So how familiar are you with the issues around invasive species? Cool. It sounds like we got lots of people who are quite familiar. I love that. And then we got some people who are learning some more. This is great. So we got people across the spectrum. That's great. We want to make sure that we're going to provide a definition for those who are just getting started, and then as well, just making sure we're all on the same page. And we have folks who have been doing this for a very, very long time. And so hopefully we'll get to learn a lot from them. Okay, yeah, it sounds like we got people who are a little bit familiar and across the whole spectrum. So thank you so very much for engaging with that. I'll leave that up for a little bit. So an invasive species, just to make sure that we're all together. So from Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, is an invasive species is one that is introduced to an area where it did not evolve. So it doesn't have those relationships with the other parts of its ecosystem, whether it be other types of plants or pollinators. It doesn't, it's not invested and it doesn't have those relationships built already. So it does have to be an introduced species. But just because it is an introduced species does not mean that it is causing harm. There are so many species that are non-native, which are perfectly fine here. But to be an invasive species, it not only has to be introduced, but it also has to cause harm either to the natural resources, to its ecosystem, or economic activity, or us humans. So if it meets those two criteria, it can be an invasive species. And we'll have our panelists talk about the ones that they've faced and kind of the ones that they've seen a lot of. So without further ado, let's hop in and meet our panelists. We have a rock star panel today. We're so excited to hear from each of them, and then give you all some time to ask them some questions. So we have Billy Paul Mays joining us, Eugene Triplett, Margaret Fisher, and Jennifer Souls. And as we introduce each of them, I'll tell you a little bit about more, and then I'll turn it over to them. So we are super excited and so very thankful to have each of them joining us today. Okay. So our first panelist is Billy Paul Mays. He's the owner and operator of Beech Spring Farm in Nelson County, Virginia, and he's the president of Farm Bureau in Nelson County. So very, very involved in his local farm community and as well in so many other organizations that are doing advocacy and policy around invasives. And his family has owned this land for almost 100 years and so is really, really connected to the land that he works in. So I will turn it over to him and let him share with you more about his story and his journey. Oh, let's get you unmuted there, Billy. Oh, 1 second. There we go. Do you want to unmute real quick? Sorry, everybody. There we go. Click that red button. We're doing great. That microphone. Did it just ask you to unmute? There we go. We got it. We're all set. Thank you so very much for your patience. We're good. Good. So go ahead and take it away, Billy.
All right. Thank you, Taylor. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Taylor said, I am William Mays, and I go by Billy Paul. And I'm the owner-operator of Beech Spring Farm in Nelson County, Virginia. This farm produces high-quality commercial breeding stock of Red Angus / Balancer genetics. And the land has been in our family for almost 100 years, but we have ancestry here dating to the late 1700s. So I'm deeply rooted here. As a full-time farmer and president of our county farm bureau for many years, I am sharing with you all our story in hopes that it will educate and shed light on the devastating effects certain invasive species have on our pastures and timberland and the environment. The farm consists of upland pastures, hayfields, and forested mountain timberland situated in the headwaters of several tributaries of the Ty and Piney River watershed. And the land has been productive for generations. As a young boy growing up here on the land, I watched as multiflora rose and kudzu, introduced by government programs in the 1950s, spread over our property. To this day, they are still a huge problem after decades of measures to control them. There are many invasive species that have established on our acreage since that time. And just to name a few, privet, Japanese honeysuckle, tree of heaven, perilla mint, Japanese stiltgrass, and cincrus, or fountain grass. Of these species, the most threatening by far to this farm is cincrus. While many invasives are non-commercial, cincrus is commercial and widely distributed in the nursery trade as an ornamental grass. Around 10 or 12 years ago, a neighboring landowner who has since moved on planted a 50-yard fence row with cincrus. From that planting, it has spread onto hundreds of adjoining acres. This grass is a perennial clump grass, warm season, native to Asia and Africa. It will outcompete any cool season grass very rapidly. And there are now significant areas of monoculture establishment of this grass, which is severely impacting the production of forage on the farm. The cattle will graze this grass in spring and early summer, but once it goes in reproduction, in about late July, early August, it becomes very tough and lignified, and it does not grow another leaf. It only produces massive quantities of seed on tall plume-like stems. Thus, you get the name fountain grass. It will seed out multiple times before frost, and currently there. So let me go back here. I've added a few little things into this. The seed then collects on livestock that are grazing what is there to eat in the pasture, remnants of fescue and orchard grass, and some clover that's down in the sward. That seed collects as it dries out, and it collects on the livestock hides and hooves, and is carried or dispersed in a rotational pasture system. That seed goes wherever the cattle goes. Of course, wildlife of all kinds also spread the seed. Wind and water as well. Disturbance in the wintertime when feeding or rolling hay out serves to incorporate the seed. and the seed is viable in the environment for 8 to 10 years. Let me pick up. Currently, there are very limited controls for this grass other than a complete kill with glyphosate. Turf grass herbicides could possibly be used, such as quinclorac, but labeling for pastures becomes a main issue, along with cost and added crop oil with the spray. So to eradicate this species is a very challenging task in a grass-based production system. A complete kill and switch to annuals production for many years is what has been recommended. This farm is made up of upland pastures that are designated highly erodible land by USDA, and cropping them could be very detrimental and risky. Aside from the cost of renovation and the cost of production, and along with the likelihood of losing valuable topsoil and a carbon release, there is also a devaluing of our farmland. All this adds up to be an overwhelming burden on any farmer or landowner facing these problems. Virginia is blessed with thousands of acres of good grasslands that are not suitable to cropping, but are the sustaining and critical part of our livestock industry. This and other invasive grasses are a huge threat to the future of our grasslands. Likewise, they pose a threat to our native ecosystems and the environment as a whole. As you may be aware, the Blue Ridge Prism is working with the DCR to analyze and assess invasive species and develop a growing list of the worst threats. I highly recommend that organization because they are really doing a wonderful job on the front lines of invasive species. Some of these worst threats, along with synchros, are very much for sale, still for sale in Virginia. Working together and building alliances to bring awareness to this problem of invasives being proliferated onto our landscape is of utmost importance to many. I thank you for your interest in this cause and certainly hope you would never go out and buy any synchros. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Billy. I know it's the synchros has been a major issue on your farm, so thank you for sharing your story with us. And as well, after each of our panelists, we will have some resources listed, and you will, after this webinar is complete and you get the recording, you'll actually get a list of all of these different resources that they talk about, that they use on either a daily basis or that they're reliable ones. Okay. So our next panelist, we are excited to bring you Reverend Eugene Triplett. He is the owner of Pat Acre Farms and is a fifth-generation farmer in Culpeper County. And his true passion is farming and helping those within his community. And he is also so involved that he is the board chair of the Northern Piedmont Community Foundation, and is actively working to help with food insecurity within his community. So, Reverend Eugene, please go ahead and take it away. Oh, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Unmuted.
There you go.
Good evening to everyone. It's good to be on here. Kind of a little background. I didn't know anything about sustainability matters, and I had a tour about a month ago to a landfill. And Andrea and I got to talking, and we got to talking about native species and all that. And so she says, oh, okay, maybe you should come and talk to us about invasive species. And so my way of talking today, I'm going to kind of deal with the economic aspects of invasive species. And here on my farm, here it's Pat Acres Farm, I say I'm a fifth generation farmer, but I can actually trace my family on this land within maybe 30 miles of here back about 200 years back into the 1700s. But what you see there is a picture of my cattle. I raise red Angus cattle, have a greenhouse, a high tunnel. And one of the things I wanted to talk about more than anything is the fact that nurseries are selling so many invasive species to homeowners. And so around me, as you can see right below me, my neighbors built that house down there, and they put an autumn olive tree out there. They also have some fountain grass back along the side. So guess what happens to all of that later on? It all comes over into my field, and the birds eat the autumn olives, and they sit on the fence, and then they drop the seeds, and they come up and do all of that. But I kind of want to look at the kudzu, uh, and we're talking about grasses, but one of the major ones that I have around here, because I do raise cattle, and it's not really an invasive species, but it's called Kentucky 31 tall fescue. And if anybody's ever raised cattle, you know that when cattle eat that in the summertime, it causes them to want to stand in the ponds. It cuts off the circulation. They don't gain weight and all like that. And also around here, I have a high tunnel, and I have Japanese beetles. And I don't know if you realize that Japanese beetles are also an invasive. They're not native here. They're an invasive species. So they come and eat my elderberry bushes. They eat all of my other things in the garden. And like Billy, he didn't say anything, but we have so many deer around here that it's just kind of a problem. Uh, and so I kind of wanted to talk about the tall fescue. And on my farm, I started converting most of my tall fescue over to native warm season grasses. And right now, I'm working with Ernst Seed and the Clifton Foundation. I'm actually growing native plants. They look like weeds, but they're really native plants. I have a bunch of mountain mint, ironweed, and all, and I have about a quarter acre of that growing. And so I'm trying to get the native grasses and the native species back. Uh, as you look on my farm, that's my cattle out there, and you see all of that, those trees over there. And if you go out there and look on most of those trees, ivy, English ivy is growing up on just about all of them, and it's kind of taken over. And so my favorite thing is I've converted a lot of my pastures to native little blue stem, big blue stem, and Indian grass, and I've tried to get rid of a Kentucky 31. And I just wanted to share with you the economic aspects of Johnson grass, which is another thing that we have here. But the time and the labor of trying to get rid of Johnson grass, and if you farm anything, you know that there's Roundup Ready seed. And in order to get rid of Johnson grass, you have to spray it with Roundup. But the Roundup Ready seeds for my corn farmers and my soybean farmers, it's about a 50 to 40% cost for Roundup Ready seeds. And so um, here I've got, just kind of all of the herbicides, the health, the cattle, and then all of the overhead that causes a farmer to have to pay more for all of that. And as we get to the last slide on here, I don't know if you saw the rainbow that was on one of the slides. That I took a picture of that. I've been looking for that pot of gold over there in that little corner for quite a while, but I haven't found it yet. Uh, but I just wanted to tell everybody the main thing is to talk to the nurseries and talk to your neighbors and tell them to, those plants, they might look nice in their yard, but the birds and like Mr. Mays said, the cattle will move it around, and so it's causing a lot of money to small farmers. And so that's kind of all I had to talk about there. Like I said, uh, my introduction to this was just at a landfill in Rappahannock County, looking at all of these natives and all the autumn olive up there. But I just wanted to tell everybody that natives, invasive species are really kind of taking over. And around this area, one other species, we have feral hogs running around here. and that's another problem we have. And so all of the resources, talk to your local county extension offices, your natural resource, NRCS. I also serve on the Virginia State University Small Farm Outreach Program, Virginia Tech, Clifton Institute, and your soil and water conservation districts. They can give you all the information you need to get rid of all of these invasive species there. So that's about all I have to say. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble on today.
That's great. Um, just very quickly, while we had a little extra minute, Eugene, could you mention a little bit more about what you're doing with the Clifton Institute and the seed program? We had somebody ask a question.
Yeah,
About
what they did is they gave me some native, like I said, I've got mountain mint, a type of ironweeds, and I'm growing it. And so what we do is we collect the seeds, we grow them. Got them in my garden. We grow the seeds, we collect the seeds, and then we send them up to Ernst. They process them, and then they put them all in these mixtures to replant native pastures. And one of the things I'm trying to get around here is I'm trying to get bobwhite quail to return to my area because as a kid, like I said, I've lived on this farm all my life, and like I said, right now I can trace back 5 generations. But as a child, we used to hunt bobwhite quail. There were pheasants around here, and so that's what we're doing now is just to try to get everything back to the native and get rid of all this fescue, that's Kentucky 31 fescue that's growing up around here.
Perfect. Thank you so very much for sharing. And I know you're doing some research with the Clifton Institute on populating native seeds. So thank you for sharing
Right.
and for answering that. Somebody was very curious. Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you, Eugene. Our next panelist is Margaret Fisher. And so she is a volunteer working with many different organizations, but is very highly active with planting native plants and is a volunteer with Fairfax Master Naturalist and Fairfax Invasives Management Area, and is a Fairfax Invasives Management Area site leader. She is also one of the coordinators with PlantNOVA Natives and the PlantNOVA Trees campaign. So Margaret, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. PlantNOVA Natives is one of 9, I believe, regional native plant campaigns around Virginia. And each of those has their own flavor, but in Northern Virginia, we're a collaborative effort of at least 100 organizations working together to promote the use of native plants. Next slide, then. So it occurred to me when I was getting ready for this that we wouldn't even need a native plant campaign if it weren't for 2 things. One, the invasives, and the other turfgrass, right? Because if you just have a few azaleas in your lawn that are non-native, that's not a big deal. But the problem is that we've replaced so much of our natural areas with turfgrass, and also with invasive plants that then get into our native ecosystems and wipe them out. So that's why we have a native plant campaign to counter that. It turns out that actually we could have an invasive plant campaign and serve the same purpose, because as soon as people get the idea of what an invasive is, then they want to know about the opposite, which is the natives. By the way, I was stung to the quick to hear about you say that mountain mint and ironweed look like weeds, but it's okay. But just so you know, everybody, there are lots and lots of native plants that are garden worthy and look like just as beautiful as any of the invasive ornamentals you could buy in a store. So the next slide, please. All right. How big of a problem is this in Northern Virginia? If you look at iNaturalist, which is a place where people document species, about a quarter of the species, plant species growing in our natural areas at this point in time are non-native. And that's a lot. We've displaced a quarter of the plants, but that figure doesn't actually truly represent the problem, because if you look at that picture there in the middle of climbing vines, that vine may only be 1 out of 300 plant species that are in that area, but that one species is totally dominating. And that's the problem with the invasive species. They can really dominate just as the cenchrus does in a pasture. Also, if you start learning about these plants, you'll discover that most common garden weeds are actually also non-native. So the things that are really beautiful and desirable are the native plants. In our gardens, unfortunately, we have so many things that are invasive. Can we have the next slide, please? And so how would you know? Because the first thing you want to do is to look at your own property and see, do you have any of these things that are going to invade somebody else's property? And we don't, nobody can expect to become a plant expert. You probably don't even know most of the plants that are growing in your yard, or most people wouldn't. There are a number of apps that are quite useful for identifying plants. Picture this as a common one. I like it quite a lot. It's not perfect though, so don't bet your life on the results. Better than that is iNaturalist, in which it is a little bit more honest because it'll tell you several different choices of what it might be, right? And also human beings may go in and help you correct your identification. And then, once you know what the species is, then you can look on the list of the Department of Conservation and Recreation and see if it's been declared invasive in Virginia. And next slide, please. And then once you know that you have a plant that's a problem, then the really fantastic place to find out what to do with it would be the Blue Ridge Prism fact sheets. And because it's not always just a matter of cutting it down. Sometimes that actually can make things worse. So you want to learn all about it before you start trying to remove it. Next slide, please. And then, of course, you want to replace those bad plants that you removed with other plants, and hopefully native plants, because it's only the native plants that will support our ecosystem. The birds and the butterflies depend almost entirely on our native plants for food. So how do you find out what's a native plant? There are native plant guides for all of those 9 Virginia native plant campaigns. And so if you go to plantvirginianatives.org, you can find the guide for your region. Next slide, please. All right, and also on the PlantNOVA Natives website, I'm happy to say that we've been able to make it kind of the go-to place for learning about native plants and using them in your landscape. So we can tell you everything, if you want container plants or you want ground covers or whatever, it's probably on that website. A few years ago, we started a tree campaign as part of the native plant campaign, and it rapidly became obvious that planting trees is not enough. The much more important actually is to save the trees that you already have. So we call that the Tree Rescuer campaign. Can you go to the next slide, please? All righty. I'll get back to that part in a second. Let's see. In your yard, these are some examples of ones that you might find and want to remove. So that, of course, is an early step you'd want to take in helping this problem. And the next slide, please. But if you want to do more, if you want to help your community on the whole, there are many, many ways that you can get involved in this movement. So we have this program in Northern Virginia that's actually been adopted in 2 or 3 other places in Virginia, and you could start in your region too, which we call the Tree Rescuer campaign, where volunteers take door hangers around to the houses of people where they see trees that are being attacked by invasive vines, and they leave them this message about that they may want to take care of their tree before their tree gets killed. There are also training programs for volunteers on how to identify invasive vines. We have those in Northern Virginia. And there are multiple events everywhere on all parts of Virginia where you can go. You don't have to learn anything. You just go to the parks and help remove the invasives under the instruction of someone who knows what they're doing. Next slide, please. All right. So one of the biggest areas, besides our parks, which are being completely overrun in many areas, the other another very big problem place is the roadside rights of way. If you're driving along any highway in Northern Virginia, you're going to see a lot of trees at risk. And then once you actually get into these areas, you'll find there's shrubs and other problems and invasive trees as well. VDOT in Northern Virginia, and I'm sure they'd be perfectly happy to do this in other areas, are can issue you a permit to work in a given right of way, and they don't have many demands on you. They just trust that you know what you're doing to at least clip the vines at the base and save the trees in those areas. And we're working with them on expanding that so that you could work on other species as well, and sort of adopt the area. And if you want to hire somebody like a landscaper to go in and really take care of it, if you felt like doing that. The next slide. There we go. Okay. Other places that you can help if you belong to a faith community. Many places of worship have a lot of empty lawn, but where they don't have empty lawn, they often have some unlandscaped areas. And if you look very closely, you get often, probably almost always, are going to find invasive plants. And in some cases, they can really just be ruining the land. So one of these areas that we worked with recently, they had no idea that the large numbers of trees right next to their church were covered with Asian wisteria, and some of those trees were already starting to come down, and they were really threatening the sanctuary. So they quickly got it together to take care of that problem, but you have to know about it first. So you'd be doing your faith community a big favor to go look for that problem. If you live in a community association, same issue with the common land. Usually there's going to be invasives and they can just ruin it. So if you look at that picture on the right, that area is essentially completely ruined. It could be restored, but it's going to be expensive. And the sooner you get to this, the less expensive it is. Next slide, please. And then once you've taken out the, there you go. Once you've taken out invasives, in some cases, you may need to restore the native plants. In many cases, if it hasn't gotten too out of hand, you may not need to do anything. Just control the invasives and the natives will start coming back on their own from seed. But if it's been totally trashed, then you may need to plant native plants. And there are many organizations that work on this. Friends of the park. The WNOD is a really good example of that trail. There's a friends group that works on that you can volunteer with. But there are master gardeners and master naturalist chapters all around the state that are undoubtedly doing this work. So the next slide. Yes. Well, so our natural areas, when they're not infested with invasives, are so beautiful, right? They're so gorgeous. And we're seeing them slowly get lost. And what I would assert is that it's not too late. It will be too late if we wait. And the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. But if we come together as a community, I think we can solve this problem. And I hope everyone will go spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And there's a whole list of resources here, which we will send to everybody, of many of the things that Margaret shared during her talk just now. Okay, so let's bring up our final panelist here. So we have Jennifer Souls. So Jennifer is the Natural Resource Specialist for Arlington County, even though she says the title would be better as the Invasive Plant Coordinator. And she works on the ground every day with invasive plants and also many volunteers in urban and suburban areas. And she is very heavily involved in actively removing invasive species. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Taylor. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm really happy to join you all. And it was really good for me to I was really valuing getting the perspective from the farmers as well, because most of what I do is in a very urban and suburban area. My actual first induction to invasive species did occur on a farm. My parents bought a tree farm out in Rockbridge County decades ago, back when I was a college student. And we planted things like autumn olive that we got from the Department of Forestry at the time. So, and then we started learning about tree of heaven there. Um, and then, in other ways, I got involved. I worked at nature centers for a long time, and where I got involved and learned about invasives here was because as I was working at the nature centers, there were regular volunteer events happening. And I was like, oh, what are these people doing here in our park? And, started joining them. I think that, for me, learning about invasives and starting to recognize them, you see them everywhere. Like before, you just went for a walk in the woods or you went for a walk down the country lane and you saw these green plants and things seemed good. And once you start learning about invasives and learning more and more species, everywhere you go, you're just like, oh, that looks terrible. Oh, that looks terrible. Oh, this looks, you stop being able to like just innocently enjoy all your walks and you start like, oh, wait, I can't actually go down this trail. I have to pull plants. Um, so it can be very discouraging when you start realizing how prevalent they are. Um, but for me, it was also something where it was also really inspiring because I could make a concrete difference. It might not be I could go out there and in an hour I could see that I had accomplished something. And, it might not be the whole woods, but I freed that one tree, or it might not be the whole meadow, but I got rid of that clump of something. Um, and there's a lot of other actions we can take, in our communities where, especially for environmental issues, where sometimes we take an action and we don't see what that does. I recycle. I don't see the difference that makes in the waste stream of the county. I might take public transit to work. I don't see the difference that's making in terms of climate change. So this is something where I can see myself making a concrete difference. Um, and and then once you sort of get involved and you start working on it, then there's another wave of depression that kind of, or like frustration that kind of comes, which is when you realize all these plants grow back. They are plants, they have seeds in the soil, the plants grow back. And so, what you think is like, oh, I'm going to just put a lot of work into this. And then you have to put work into it again and again and again. And so it can be frustrating or difficult, but it definitely is something where we have seen and I have seen that if you can bite off the right size chunk that you can manage and put the work in again and again and again, over time you will really see an improvement and there will be fewer and fewer of these species, at least on that one site. In these pictures, the picture on the trying to look at my screen. The picture with all the English ivy on the ground, the picture on the right, is Lubber Run Park. And we started invasive management there almost 20 years ago now. And a year or so ago, I was at Lubber Run in the spring and in the parking lot looking across the stream valley. And I was like, what, are there still patches of snow over there on the ground? And it was the bloodroot flowers, which is a native wildflower that had, been present, but the population has just really, really spread in areas across the park. And just to see that plant community sort of build itself back again. Um, for me also as doing natural resource manager, another thing that's happened in our parks that we've gotten in, not perfect. There are still invasives present, but they're not dominating the system anymore. In Leper Run, if a tree falls over and there's that gap and the light comes down onto the forest floor, in some of our parks, that gap is immediately just swallowed by invasive vines and bushes. And in the parks we've been doing work for a long time, natural regeneration can occur, deer management issues aside. Uh, so, we are seeing that it works and we are seeing this positive thing. And it's a way of, I guess, of like trusting nature. Like it gives me a chance to trust that the good thing will happen if I do the good thing. And like if we get that negative stressor out in a lot of places, as Margaret was saying, if the problem hasn't gotten too bad, it will sort of heal itself. Like that natural plant community will reemerge, and restore itself. Trying to think if there was anything. Yeah. So my current job, I help coordinate a lot of volunteer work in our parks, and that sort of for me is something that is just personally really rewarding. I like getting out there. It gets me out in the park. I get to make a difference. As I said, I get to meet other people who are working to make a difference, and I'm excited to be out there. It takes me back to my days where we're off the trail and we might, find a cool skull or bone, or we might just have a nice animal sighting or something like that while we're outside, and meeting other people. And I think that to me, that sort of speaks to, if you're going to be dealing with this, whether it's on your farm or your backyard or in your community, there are sort of three things I think that have to happen. I would have some sort of plan, prioritize and figure out what you can do, and not just what you could do if you did it all, but what can you do if you have to do it again and again and again. So prioritize that. It says it's really frustrating to hit 100 places and then come back to where you started and it doesn't look like anything happened. It's better to do 10 places and work from there. I strongly recommend using herbicide if you have a larger scale problem. Some of these things cannot be tackled just by hand. And then the other thing I would say is don't try to do it alone. Try to find those, whether it's the Blue Ridge Prism or Virginia Working Landscapes or your neighbor across the street who you take turns, like being like, let's work in my backyard, let's work in your backyard, a local community group. Because for me, those volunteers are the I'm not doing this alone. There's no way Arlington would be achieving what we are. We've got about 550 acres of natural land, and we are now past the halfway mark in terms of controlling invasives, on that land. And we wouldn't be there without the volunteers. And for me, that's that community that provides support. And and I have one last thing to say. Speaking of plants for sale, um, there are two bills. Last year, they passed, two bills went through the House, the Virginia House and Virginia Senate, to have information at the point of sale. So where these plants are sold, they were going to have require signage at the point of sale. Those bills got through the House and Senate. They were vetoed. They've changed some aspect language. Then they hope that it'll get through this time. Once again, both bills have gotten through the House and Senate in the last week or so, and should be going to Governor Youngkin in the next. I don't know the timeline of the process, but within, I imagine, the next month or so. It's HB 1941 and SB 1166. There's more information on these on the Blue Ridge Prism site, or the Virginia Conservation Network is also a good place to track legislation. And if that is signed within a year or so, they will start requiring signage in front of something like fountain grass, letting consumers know that this plant is invasive and recommending that they ask about alternatives. So that's someplace I see hope. I think there's been a lot of progress on that. And I could keep talking, but I think I might be at time.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you for mentioning the bill. Somebody had actually posed a question, so thank you for answering that as well. That's a great thing. So please support that bill. That will help greatly with a lot of these issues that our panelists have talked about. So now, really quickly, I would love to invite Andrea McJimsey, our executive director, to share some of the work that we have going on along some of our local trails. So I'll let Andrea tell you more.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I just wanted to take a moment and thank the panelists for joining. Your voices are very powerful, and hopefully many people will watch this webinar online after today. So we are doing our part to try to meet this enormous challenge. And when I think about the invasives problem, by the way, I'm a native, and it hurts me of Virginia. It hurts me to watch our beautiful forests being taken over and not looking like the Virginia that I grew up in. So I'm very passionate about getting other people involved. And we have a program called Making History Bloom, which we started on the WNOD Trail, which for those of you who don't live in Northern Virginia, it's a 45-mile long trail that's 100 feet wide. It's an old railroad bed, and it is covered with invasives. But so it's an enormous challenge. But the awesome opportunity is that over 3 million people use that park every year. So it's an incredible opportunity to get the word out about this problem, because there's still just so many people who just they don't know about it. So we wanted to invite you to get involved with our efforts. Our first native meadow, we cleared the invasives, and we are going to be seeding a native meadow on February 8th in Vienna at the Love Sign. And we're going to hopefully be doing a big project in Reston. We're hoping to do some work in Ashburn. I mean, we could, again, it's 45 miles long. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved and volunteer with us. So, and then I want to tell you about one more thing we're struggling with right now. We planted a wonderful native meadow at the biggest park in the city of Winchester over in the valley. And unfortunately, in its first year, we had a big crabgrass problem. So we are recruiting people. If you're over there, we would love you to get involved with us and help us make it a bit healthier this coming year. And we're really lucky that we have our native plant expert from the Virginia State Arboretum lives in Winchester, and he'll be overseeing the work to nurture the native meadow. So those are just two opportunities, and we have plenty more. So please get involved with Sustainability Matters. Come volunteer. You really can make a difference. Tell your friends and neighbors about it. And also, of course, lift up all the other wonderful resources that we've talked about today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So we do have about 10 minutes. If anybody does have any questions that they'd like to put forth, I know our panelists have and Kenny have been answering some questions as we've gone, and some have been addressed throughout time. But if you have, please go ahead and you can write your questions into the Q&A box. And we can go ahead and share those, either myself or Kenny, and then our panelists can take on some of those. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Oh, one of our very first questions was about the impact of invasive species on the effectiveness of the health of the cattle, and whether it was a good food source, or what were the impacts around that. So either Billy or Eugene, if you'd like to hop in.
Well, the invasives outcompete a lot of the natives, and like I said, I planted native warm seeds and grasses, and one of the things we had this year, I don't know if y'all had a drought, but we had a kind of a major drought here. And during the summer, I turned my cattle into the native warm seeds and grasses, and they just enjoyed themselves. So it's having a major impact on your fence rows with your cattle. And some of these natives, I don't know, they might be toxic to the cattle. So that's another problem. I don't know. Billy probably has the same problem up in Nelson County with his cattle.
Billy Paul, can you come off mute? I know you have a powerful answer for this. Kenny, are you able to unmute him?
Looks like you
got it.
There we go.
The question was on how much the invasive grass impacts the cattle. Well, there are several invasive grasses here. The largest problem is synchros. The other one is a Japanese stiltgrass that likes to take over pastures in a big way. course, they like shade. The fountain grass does not like shade that much, but as far as nutrition, I don't think fountain grass has a lot of nutrition. There's a lot of it in a monoculture, as the clumps are much bigger than fescue, and it could be 18 inches deep of green forage. The cattle consume a lot of it in the early spring, along with other grass that's there. In the monocultures, I haven't seen a big drop in weaning weights or health issues because of fountain grass. And that's the reason I'm still hanging on. But it's just sad to see good productive pasture land turn into a non-native Asian African clump grass that I had no part in putting there. And a lot of this is just a travesty of how these things happen, because pretty innocent back then when we started seeing those clumps. We didn't even know what they were. And in fact, the sheep got out of the neighboring farm where the synchros was planted and got out on me and carried the seed. But I did not know what they were. And in fact, it took a specialist from the Harrisonburg Extension Office to come down here and tell me. But I have not seen negative health benefits from either of the two grasses. Tall fescue, of course, has always been a problem, and the way to do that is dilute the pasture with other species and give them plenty of shade.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We got a couple other questions in here. So DJ has asked about English ivy. So if I know a couple of you deal with this quite often, and says that it's climbing on so many trees in Tacoma Park. So I'm assuming that's where they live. And so what exactly would be the impact of these vines on the trees?
Well, I can address that. When you see it on the trees now, you think, oh, that kind of looks pretty. And isn't that how it's supposed to look? And you think, how bad can it be? But if you see it in places where it's been growing longer, you can suddenly get why this is a problem, because it gets huge. So it weighs down the tree and pulls it over. And meantime, having that vegetation against the bark is not good for the bark of the tree.
Kills the tree.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. It kills the tree eventually. Just have to wait long enough. And
Yeah,
we're looking long term here.
I wanted to weigh in on this. I'm a former elected official, and I also used to run a big historic site, 400-acre historic site. And 15 years ago, taking down one of the big trees cost $2,000. Is probably much more expensive than that at this point. So if we let these vines kill the trees, you're looking at a big economic impact on any property. And also it's a public safety issue because a tree falling, of course, is very dangerous for anyone who's underneath. So this is a big issue for the suburbs and the cities, as well as our farmers. And we need to be talking to our elected officials and letting them know, that we care about this. And then again, get your friends and neighbors to come and volunteer and learn about this, because too many people just don't know about it and innocently plant things without realizing the problem.
And the other problem with English ivy is that once it climbs up, it goes to seed, and the birds will take the berries onto other people's properties. It's very unneighborly to let it go up your tree.
Also, just cutting the vines on that will not kill that. It's living off the tree. You can cut the vines at the bottom, and almost there's no vines that aren't cut, and that it will still live on that tree for a long time. That's the experience I've had. It can live on the tree. It's a parasite.
Do you have to be careful when you're kind of making sure you're leaving that gap for sure. Let's see, we do have a couple more questions, and I know we're approaching the hour, so if anybody does have to hop off, don't worry. We do have a couple more questions that I want to make sure we get to, but everybody will receive the recording, so if we don't get to your question while you're here and have to hop off, you'll be able to see it and view it in the recording. So a couple more. So somebody asked about forest mulching. So has anybody had any experience with forest mulching as a method for combating vines, whether it's a good idea, bad idea, or maybe best practices? If anybody wants to take that one.
Anybody? Okay, I have not had experience with it, but it is something I am looking at to use in some areas in Arlington. So I've been going out to other jurisdictions and just talking to them about forest mulching, getting, how much would it cost for us to rent a mulcher, that sort of thing. I think that if you have a fairly, you have to think about erosion in the soil and what will happen, because it's not as like destructive, you're not ripping the plants out of the ground, but you are going to have some ruts and soil disturbance. So you might not want to do it on really steep areas, but if you have a flat area, it can be a really, that's almost all invasives. You can go in there and you can kind of go around trees, like you won't get like, give them a little buffer, so you'll have some work to do. And it can be much more cost effective than sort of traditional hire, at least for us, hiring a contractor to get in there and hand deal with every single plant. You do have to have a follow-up plan, because you're creating this open, disturbed area, which is, hey, invasive plants' favorite habitat. So unless you have, okay, what I'm going to put down a seed mix, and then I'm going to mow this like a lawn, I'm going to do restoration planting, you have to have some sort of follow-up plan. But it can be a good way to start a project, but you have to have a plan for what are you going to do after that for the next 5 years, because just mulching it all is not going to solve the issue.
So having a plan is an answer to a lot of these.
Follow up,
Yeah.
5-year follow-up plan.
Making sure you know those next steps, because you're right, these species, they do tend to come back, so it is something that you usually do have to treat multiple times. Let's see, we do have one or two more questions. Somebody did ask early on, I just wanted to make sure this was highlighted for everybody, about local nurseries that do sell native plants, or maybe where to buy seeds, since a lot of people are, if we want to get rid of the invasives, what is a solution? Where can we buy these native plants? So if anybody just briefly wants to share some of their go-tos.
I put in the chat a link to the Virginia Native Plant Society website, and they have a listing of nurseries that sell native plants. In Northern Virginia, we actually have volunteers who go to the conventional nurseries and label the native plants with little red stickers. But that's, you to find native only nursery, you go to the VNPS website.
Yeah, I have definitely been heartened in the last few years at how many more native plants are for sale, even at like, some of more conventional nurseries. They still have a ton of invasives, but they do have plants I wouldn't have seen 10 years ago for sale. And I think that like the work that Clifton Institute is doing, trying to get local seed sources from give farmers work, growing these plants so we can have these seeds in our seed mixes. And just, look, searching around. And I know they sell out. Like I've been to native plant sales, and within 2 hours they're, sold out. So definitely something that's happening.
I'd be curious to ask the farmers, how do you have any feel for what proportion of farmers are feeling the effect of the invasive plants? Is it most, or just a few so far? Or what are you noticing?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you're a crop
I think
farmer,
all of them really are.
go ahead. Go ahead, Eugene.
Go ahead, Eugene. Oh, there we go. While we wait for him to come back, Billy, go ahead and finish what you were going to tell everybody.
Okay. Essentially, if you're a crop farmer, you have chemistry to take care of most of your weed problems, and so that as a crop farmer, you're not going to really focus on invasives, whether a weed is invasive or not. You're going to be focused on whether it's it won't respond to the chemistry and it's going to invade your fields, even though you spray Roundup resistant weeds and stuff like that. But as a grass farmer in a grass situation, it is a huge threat to, and I say grasses are such a big threat because with broadleaves, it's a clear directive on what you can do, and you will see results. With grasses, it's not so much. It's a kind of uncharted territory, especially in pasture grasses, where these invasive grasses come in, and you're going to get a recommendation. Oh, just spray it with Roundup and plant an annual, and wear the seed bed out over a few years. Or go to some Roundup ready crop. Well, that's good on cropland, but it's not good on upland pastures where it's not suitable to crop. These are native grasslands. They've been improved and then were taken over by this species that is in its paradise. I mean, it is living its greatest life on my fields because they're fertile and there's no enemies. There's nothing to harm this grass. And it just simply is a terrible situation. So that's where it becomes the real issue of having to deal with an herbicide that's going to make you want to have to plant an annual crop, double crop, so to speak, plant a summer annual and then a winter annual to graze over a period of years to wear the seed bank out. And by the way, it goes from creek bank to creek bank. It's in your sandbars, in your gravel beds, in your creeks, in your small streams. It's going downstream. It's going to take over the watershed in a decade or less. It will be as far reaching as, the James River runs into the bay. All on the banks of all these rivers that the invasives are on are spreading downstream. And it's affecting all the animals and all the ecology that is on the banks, and all the ecology that of the little streams that run into these the little seeps and things like that. It affects all the ecology there. So these are monsters that are released onto the landscape without any regard to the damage they cause. And that's the real travesty of saying to the nursery trade and to the growers of these plants, look, if you could see what they've done to these properties, maybe you would change your mind. And if you own this property, you would feel like me. And I'm a pretty good farmer here and have a high production system. And I frankly, and neither does Virginia Tech, know really what to do about this. And this is an ongoing situation for years now. Promises and no results of programs or trial runs, trial test plots. There's no money, and there's not really a lot of information. And that's what's so discouraging. So So that's my answer there.
No, thank you. Somebody had a follow-up question to that, because it's such a big issue, and with your involvement in the Farm Bureau, does Farm Bureau think that the invasives are a sufficient problem to take to the state level, or
Yes,
okay?
I have worked for several many years to make invasive species one of the 5 critical issues that Farm Bureau government relations takes on every year. We have not been successful in getting it to be a critical issue. But however, it is I think in the top 10. And recently we changed our policy, had a policy upgrade to allow us to address that signage bill and to favor it and to work really hard to get that bill passed as we did last year. However, policies take time to evolve. There's even a policy to work to remove some of these species and to address how plants could go on the noxious weed list. And the VNLA in recent years past have a law saying that if it was grown and sold and commercially produced in Virginia, a species could never go on the noxious weed list. There is now a policy in Farm Bureau that suggested that criteria be looked at and the negative impact of those species on the environment be looked at along with the commercial viability. And if the negative impact was greater, to remove those species from sale and put them on the noxious weed list. So that's what's really happening. It's going to take a lot of support, a lot of awareness, and people getting to their legislators and explaining stories like mine, and maybe you have some of your own or know others that do. Wherever these plants are that are creating havoc, they're travesties to the landowner and to the neighboring lands. It's on 300 acres in my little where I live right here. It's on around 300 acres and going downstream very fast. And so I don't know what to do. I really don't. It's bigger than me. It's a monster.
Thank you so much for sharing. I believe that was the last of the questions that we had put forward. So just the biggest thank you to all of our panelists and our team. There were some people throwing out some thank yous in the chat as well. So a big round of applause and thank you to our wonderful panelists. We have a couple things just to wrap up and then some next steps. So just in general, thank you all for all of our participants for being here. We're just very thankful that you were all able to join and learn with us today. And so I mentioned this, but I wanted to re-mention this again. In probably Friday, you will get a link to the video recording of this, as well as a list of tons of resources that we've talked about today from our wonderful panelists, and with different organizations, ways that you can volunteer, ways you can get involved, and even more. So you'll get all of that on Friday. And then from Sustainability Matters, we would love to see you again. We have a couple things coming up soon. On Saturday, we actually have a winter seed sowing taking place in Rappahannock at the Rappahannock County Park. If you want to come learn how to sow some seeds in a milk jug with us. We also have the seed party for our new meadow in Vienna at the Love sign right there along the WNOD Trail on February 8th. And then as well, we are in search of some mentors for our middle and high school girls. So we have a wonderful mentorship program called Ecologicals. So if you are working in the STEM industry and would love to share your expertise, especially if you are a female, we would love to highlight you and get you to come talk with our wonderful students this summer. So please feel free to reach us at hello@sustainabilitymatters.earth. We would love to talk with you some more. And we would be remiss if we did not thank our wonderful sponsors who just make sure that we're able to do great work like along our WNOD and in Winchester, and just keep sharing and promoting, especially our work, but as well all of the wonderful organizations that we heard from today. And as well, we would love if you would join us. So you feel free to contact us. There was also some other contact information from some of our panelists. You can feel free to reach out to them. And as well, if you want to stay more involved with Sustainability Matters, we encourage you to join us as a member. Feel free to visit our webpage there or make a donation so that we can bring more webinars, more panelists, and more experts so you can keep learning and exploring more ways to make sustainability matter. Perfect. And just one last time, thank you all so very much, our participants, for being here. And the biggest thank you to our wonderful panelists, Billy, Margaret, Eugene, Jennifer. Thank you all so very much for sharing your time and your expertise and your stories with us today. It's so greatly appreciated. And we hope to see all of you, including our participants, again very, very soon, maybe on our next webinar or at one of our new events. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar there. But a big round of applause and thank you all so very much. And we hope to see you soon.